We were coming,
That's lobby. Lobby for lobby gobblers. Here.
Well, welcome to today's episode, and it's just a little bit different today. So how's it going to be different? Well, it's going to be different because today me, Tussie and Ronnie, we're actually going underground for once. We don't usually do the underground exploration videos, but we are today, and we're going to do it for a particular reason. Because as we look at history, we usually look at things that have gone back in the past from the end. But we're going to try and look at things from the beginning today. We're going to look at this colliery in East Lancashire. And I'm not going to tell you which it is around the Rossendale Valley, for obvious reasons. But I'm going to try and explain how it developed, the methods that they used to drive the drift, and what it must have been like to live in those days. Now we're going to be going back to the 1830s. And I certainly have grown up in a period where everything's closing, you know, moved to jeopardy because everybody's jobs are in jeopardy. Well, if we go back to that era, things were opening up. And I know there was times when things were not very good economically. Certainly the mid-1830s were heading to the 40s that got known as the hungry 40s for a very good reason, because there was a lot of short time, a lot of hunger, starvation even because of the Corn Laws, and industrial unsettlement. Obviously we had what are known as the plug riots, which was actually a general strike. So we're going to look at this pit. But first, let's have a look at the evolution of mining that gets us to that particular point. And I want to show you some things in the next valley. So to briefly sort of discuss the evolution of coal mining, we're actually using a couple of lead shafts here, and we'll be using some lead drifts as well. So we know the earliest sort of forms of mining around about the start of the Industrial Revolution was shallow shafts, obviously, like the two that we've got in this field. Now, if you're looking at these from a mining context, coal mining context, many people might just say, there's a couple of bell pits in this field. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, according to Richard Hudson, who was a mining engineer in Rossendale and Accrington and Burnley, now he remembers pits opening, he remembers the pit that we're discussing opening, but he was a mining engineer in the 1860s. And what he said about workings in the 1700s, especially around Rossendale, was that they would sink shafts, and they would work an area around about 100 yards around the bottom of that shaft. and then abandon it and go and sink another. So it looked like a field full of bell pits, and you can see on this LiDAR here what it kind of looks like really, but they're not bell pits. So why did they do it? Well, they did it because you've got to get your coal away from the coal face to the pit bottom or to the outside. And back in those days, that was a bottleneck. If you could overcome the problems of drainage and water, fine, but then you've still got to get your coal away from the coal face as fast as a collier can produce it. If that collier can produce 4 tonne a day, you need to be able to get 4 tonne a day away from him and up the pit. And back in those days, there were no rails. We don't have a date for the introduction of rails in Rossendale or Burnley. We do more up here, certainly in the lead areas. They were quite ahead of the coal mines. So the way they would transport it in Rossendale is by what's known as a whisket and sled method. A whisket is basically a wicker basket. Up here you would call it a carf. And they held various weights, round about 300 weight maybe, 400 weight. And that carf, wicker basket, would be filled and then put on top of a wooden sled, literally a wooden sled. And attached to the front of the sled would be a chain and then a thick leather belt. Now that leather belt will go around the waist of the drawer, whether it be a boy, a young girl or a grown woman. And then they would literally drag the sled along behind them, usually not far off being on all fours, certainly if they're in the yard mine and that. So they were like horses dragging things along. So the haulage couldn't be that far away from the face to the bottom of the shaft. I know we have all these stories, oh, they were travelling half a mile. Doesn't make any sense. It was easier to sink a new shaft and do the easiest lift, which was vertical, than drag coal an awful long way underground. So it led to multiple shafts. Then engineering techniques got to the state, especially with blasting and things like that, that they started to drive long drainage levels, and that's what we're going to look at in the Nent Valley. Some long drainage levels that doubled up. That's where all the product came out. Didn't just drain the mine, all the product came out of those levels, and it'll give you an idea of what the pit that we're going to look at in Lancashire looked like, and we'll describe blasting a little bit. But in the meantime, have another look at these shafts. Oh, and how would they wind coal up? Well, either by a jack roll, which looks like a Jack and Jill affair, literally, or they would use a horse gin. And obviously with a horse gin you could wind bigger amounts of coal for a lot longer all day. And most of them, especially the more developed of the pits, Hargreaves and so forth and that, I'm sure they would have used horse gins. But go back even further and you are down to the Jack and Jill sort of jack rolls. Anyway, we'll go and have a look at some of the long drainage levels, and that'll give you an idea of what you're going to look at underground in the coal mine we're visiting. Well, this is the show mine up at Nent Mines. They kind of open, I think, school holidays. It's worth looking online. They take you into cars level actually. It's been signed over now. It was a big project. What year? Kind of when we sort of started contracting at the pit really. Around about the year 2000. They got a lot of millennium money. An awful lot of European money and lottery money went into this place. And it went sideways as these things do. But now it's been bought. Is it North Pennines Heritage Trust who's bought it? Sheila will tell us. But anyway, it's worth a look into cars level and come up and see everything else that's here. We are. It's not exact, but it's going to be a good representation. Like I said, It's not an exact representation, but it's the closest that we're going to get. And the pit that we're looking at in Rossendale, obviously, again, this is a lead mine. The pit we were looking at had a stone stables at the drift end, but it would have been a lot similar to this, so it gives you an idea. Now then, around about the 1830s, obviously the Industrial Revolution had really took hold in the Rossendale Valley. The valley was a bit of a late starter when you compare it to South Manchester, Rochdale, Oldham and even Burnley. But the mills were growing and the demand for coal was growing, so the older type pits that had been working, that I'd kind of described through the little shafts using the horse gins and not very sophisticated haulage underneath, couldn't really cope. So more investment was put in by one of the larger companies to start a mine on a more industrial scale. And certainly the village that it was going to supply, really it was bigger than Rossendale. And certainly its industrial capacity was far bigger than Rossendale at the time. So the idea was to open up a new field of coal where the shafts had been working for nearly 200 years, dotted around the hillside. Well, there was another patch of coal that that was going to be more difficult to drain and open up, but it would last and produce around about 25,000 tonnes a year at least, more. At its peak, the pit was producing 500 tonnes a week. So what they did, they set off to drive a long drainage level under the coal, because the coal dipped, as I'll show you on my not brilliant diagram. Talk to me old tech drawing teachers about how good I was at that. So they drove a long tunnel underneath the coal that was rising slowly. So as the coal dipped, eventually they would meet. But when they did, they would be right in the middle of the take. So all that natural free drainage, the water would flow away without any charge. Not only that, the horses bringing the loads out were also going to be going down a slight down gradient, making haulage easier as well. Now on the surface, a tramway was constructed down to the turnpike roads so that the mills locally and a bit further afield could benefit from the coal mines production. Not only for the steam engines, but also, as we've said in the past, for producing gas. So how did you go about driving a road like this? And bear in mind, the road we're on about was driven a long way. We're looking at going on for at least 1,000 yards before it even got into the coal. How did they do it? Well, by patience, a lot of really hard graft and saltpetre, which is potassium nitrate, charcoal and sulphur, otherwise known as black powder, or if you're up here, pudder. Anyway, it burns with a rapid flame, and when you put it in an enclosed space, the gases there want to explode, so it'll fire a musket ball, but it'll also shatter rocks. Now we know the Chinese were the first to use gunpowder, black powder, whatever you want to call it. They used it really for fireworks and things, didn't they, around about the 10th century. And then it gained its use in military purposes. And in the early 1400s, an engineer, a Florentinian, if that's the way you pronounce it, engineer, he wanted to use it for stone reclamation. He was demolishing a monastery and he wanted the stone off it. So he used black powder to demolish it and get the stone. Now, as far as it being used in the mining industry, there appears to be, I'm not an expert in this, but from what I've looked at, there looks to be a lot of records from the early 1600s with Hungarians using it. And then certainly it's stated that the German miners that came across to this country, they were quite skilled in using black powder. But how do you drill the holes to get the black powder in? That's where the graft and the patience comes in. Well, obviously there was no mechanised way of boring, not until certainly beyond the 1860s, when compressed air started getting introduced and they could make proper percussion boring machines. So up until that time, it was all hand done, using what became known as a jumper drill. Now I wanted to try and get hold of one so I could show you what it is. Hopefully I've got a photograph. But basically, the idea, if you can imagine a chisel, like a proper iron chisel, I don't mean something you'd use for woodwork, but like a cold chisel, cold set chisel. But it'd be long. And you'd have usually two people in a partnership driving the drift. And one person would hold the jumper drill with a chisel end right up to the stone face. And the other person behind would strike it with the big hammer, with a big swing. When he'd struck it, the guy with the drill would pull it back, give it a quarter turn, and put it back in again. Bang, bang. And that is how they drilled holes. And that is why you needed patience. And there was an awful lot of hard graft. Now, I've tried to find out how long it would take to drill a hole, but obviously it depends on the sort of rock you're going through. But each hole's going to be at least a yard to 4 foot. And when you're drilling a roadway, when you're firing a roadway, you drill to a pattern. I'll show you that a bit later on, more modern patterns, drilling patterns. And I have tried to find out some old-fashioned drilling patterns and I can't. If anybody has some, please let us know. So basically you've got these two guys drilling away for most of the shift, preparing the actual rock face there, the drift, the heading end, drilling a pattern of holes to blow a wedge out of the middle, more than likely, and then to trim the roadway profile out. So the ones in the middle would be driven like a wedge shape. Obviously the holes wouldn't touch each other, but they'd be driven like a wedge, and they'd receive a heavy charge. And then round the edges would be like what we would call today trimmers, and they wouldn't have as high a charge in them. And for a start, the wedge would be blown out using, well, today it's all done electronically. Back then it was like the blue touch paper and run like Wile E. Coyote with his Acme explosives. So the holes would be drilled and then they would be charged with black powder. The black powder would be stamped in hard. Now, this is where a lot of accidents occurred, an awful lot of accidents, deaths, mutilations, blindings. Because black powder is highly explosive, so a spark from a candle could ignite it. Friction, if anybody was using an iron tamper, that could also cause an explosion. So can you see why there was such a great loss of life, limb and eyes by doing it? So the shot hole will be prepared, it will be tamped with the black powder, filled up, and then some stemming will be put. Stemming is, you could use clay. It's an inert substance that makes sure when the powder ignites, all those gases are confined at the back of the hole, which causes the shock wave to shatter the stone and push it forward. Otherwise, if there was no stemming or a plug, it would just poof, it would just fire out like it would in a gun barrel. Now, when that stemming was put in, as far as I know, a pricker would be put in then, a little hole, and the fuse inserted, or the fuse could have been put in beforehand as well, and then the stemming tamped tight to it. That's the way we do it. Then the charges would be lit and the people driving the heading would retire to a suitable place to wait for the explosion. And when that explosion went off, again, that's where danger happened. Had all the shots gone off? Sometimes the shot didn't go off at all, and people were killed by going back to investigate. Now, when that explosion had occurred, all that gunpowder reek would then be in the heading. It'd fill it, and the pit that we're looking at was a fast heading, a blank heading. Until they got a long way in, there was no air shafts, so that powder reek would just hang in the air. It would take it a long time to come out. It probably had some form of ventilation ducting in with a hand-driven fan of some sort. So they either fired what we would say at lows at the end of the shift, and during the shift changeover the stink would disappear, and then the next shift would come in, shift the stone, and then start the drilling process again. And that is how they did it. So the drift we were going in would have been driven like that, probably on 2 shifts, day and night. It would have been ceaseless until that drift was driven. When they got into the coal, they could then start to drive developments, because obviously 15 pitmen don't come into one heading. You've got to slowly open the pit out, drive the headings and make workings for them to come in. So it could have took 2 years in developing, and then a tramway down to the turnpike road. So I hope I managed to explain things a little bit. We'll explain it a bit more as we go through the video in some drilling patterns and things like that. And I've done this because we don't have a great deal of underground footage. And I hope it's give you a little bit of insight into how the pits were developed. And like I said, the 1840s, the 1830s, things were just opening up. Some of these pits lasted for over 100 years. Can you imagine? 100 years of continuous employment. That's unheard of today, isn't it? Anyway, enjoy our underground tour. Can you see out then?
I've got it on
Good job you spotted that, Ronnie, because I would never have seen that. I've walked past it a million times. Brilliant find, Ronnie, it is. Better walk past that again. They might.
Go crazy.
They mightn't. If you're up there, so we've got a basic outline of the colliery. This is the drift end where we do actually come in, and this is the main horse road. In fact, all the roads shown in red are the horse road, but this is the main road cutting underneath the coal. In fact, this green dotted line is the outcrop of coal, and this is just a basic, and I mean very basic, plan of the outlay of the whole colliery. You come in here for 300 yards, and where we get to first is what's called a shunt. Now, a shunt is self-explanatory. It is where full and empty tubs, the full tubs would wait to be taken out, they'd be marshalled there, and the empty tubs would be brought in, left here to be distributed to the various districts. And the shunt is 300 yard in by, or just short of, and it's double tracked, and it's where we see the cobbles. From there, the mine it splits into two basic districts. The first district carries straight forward. Again, it's under the coal till we get to this point where the roof has fallen in, and I suspect that is somewhere where it's about to enter the coal. And the same actually happens as we go down the second district. To this point, the roof is blown in and you can get no further. So we're going to explore for a start up this road here till we get to a packed wall, and we discuss what that packed wall's about, and I'll tell you what it actually is when we've seen it. I'm getting into the shunt. Look on the floor. You can see the cobbles starting where the horse used to come, separated into two halves. This was driven around about 1835. All hand driven with the jumper drills. They've been day and night on this trying to get it through. Get the sky ray out.
You want me to dig down so it will...
Aye, go on.
I'm not in shorts, am I? What?
No, not now. So this is where you can see daylight as well, just. This is where when the horses came in, it separated into two shunts, fulls on one side, empties on the other. And I kind of wonder if one set of horses worked from here out and another set worked from inside, you know? But it splits into two districts from here. So this is where it goes into two different districts. No, you're right, Ronnie. We are there. We'll not say which districts they separate into, but if you go to the left-hand side, that again separates into another district as well, further in, that you can't get to anymore. So this was driven around about 1835 and worked for well over 100 years. So a fantastic bit of history, and you can see where the horses came along on the they're not cobbles, they're sets, aren't they, really?
Yeah.
That's up that shows that up great. Yeah, so this is all horse work. Altogether there are over 2,000 yards of horse road in this place. You can imagine the bait times that must have been spent here. And young lads working their backsides off, chasing the tail with collars, shouting for tubs. So I just thought I'd show you another example of a horse road in the Rossendale Valley, and this is Old Meadows Colliery in Bacup, which was driven perhaps 12 or 13 years later, but we see it's just exactly the same. And really, you've got to look at the stone arching, how much work went into all that stone arching. And again, this has cobbles on the floor for the horses to grip. It's absolutely fantastic workmanship. Here we've got our iron for Ben. And a bit seeping through, and I think there's a bit of an ironstone on the floor there. Just quietly seeping through the strata. Yeah, now there's a pack wall here, a pack wall on the other side. You think that's a bit narrow for a horse, but there is an old shaft that comes down. And I'm wondering if this is what they've kind of built up here on that side. Why build a pack like that into the middle of a horse road? Kind of weird, really. And it looks like there's an old prop there on the floor, but why this pack wall? Is this where the shaft was? And it's not a coal winding shaft, it's just an air shaft, and maybe something that they used when they were driving this drift as well. The pack wall on this side. Through the pack walls on both sides, and then we've got this here. It's wider for a reason, and then you've got that. It looks like they've fired a wedge out of there to make. That's definitely a wedge that's been fired out, hasn't it, as they've been extending the tunnel. And bearing in mind they just did it with jumper drills. So I wonder if this has been a little bit of a side shunt. Go on.
Well, if that weren't there, it'd be a shunt for more than 3 tons.
I would say, and it does look like there is some shot holes here. If you look just here, I'm not seeing what I want to see, but definitely the remains of a shot hole there, and there as well. So that's been the wedge that they've been firing a bit in and then away, haven't they? You know, enlarged round it. Now here we've got a step, a geological fault. You see, and it brings in one of the coal seams. And what they did with this roadway, they drove it under the coal measures to get maximum drainage. But when they hit that coal there, this isn't the coal that they worked, but they would have used that as they were driving the roadway. They'd have managed to, rather than driving in solid rock, they'd have had something they could break in with a pick. Do you see the steps, Tussie, there? They're next to you.
Yeah.
So we're up and about 15 feet now under the coal that they were working. End of the road, and it's the same both roads, and it looks like it's been blown in intentionally. I think it looks like a shot, the way it's all fallen back like that and blown back into this road. So whether they did that when they closed it, I don't know. But these things, can you shine on them better? There's like one there, another one there, they're on this side as well. It's like they've had something across the road. Anyway, it's too low down to be the roof. There's one there, and oh, look all dug in there. So, I don't know what it was. Anyway, this is as far as you can get this way. There we are looking back down. Perforated driven. It is a good profile actually, isn't it? They've kept it pretty straight. Well, yeah, they've kept to the profile very well. Fantastic workmanship really, ain't it? Just with jumper drills. That looks like proper dog and bitch type rail. You see there's a groove in it here. On another piece of rail at the front there'd be a piece that would fit into that. You know, like a blob on the end that would fit into that to keep them all straight. So that's what old type dog and bitch type rail. It sounds a bit vulgar, but that's what it was. to the shunt, and then we follow this direction. Now this takes the horse road right under the crest of the hill into the next valley actually, and then it turns to run parallel with the horse road, with the original horse road, and again it continues all the way on. We can't get that far obviously because it's fallen in. And there is another way in down here, a little cabin, or there used to be a cabin and an air drift down there as well, which obviously provided air for this particular district. It could also have been used to bring a little bit of coal out because it is marked as Colliery on one old map. Now, after the 1860s, another district was put into this area under another hill. And this was work. This is the last area that was kind of work really. When the pit sort of finished, just at the end of the First World War rather, they were working in this area, bringing back old pillars in this area. So this was the last area of the pit to work. So again, this is blown in. You can't get any further, and we make our way back out then and back down outside. It's a pity we can't get any further. It's always eluded us. We have been in from the other side into the coal workings, but you can't get in anymore, sadly. So I hope that helps explain what the layout of the colliery for you. Yeah, you can see on this, definitely we're going through the district now, apart from my shadow, and you can see the horse, where the horse has been, the cobbles on the floor for it to grip. That's where he would have walked. And it's downhill all the way out, so I dare say that the drawers would have been sat on the tubs coming down here at a fair old lick. See the roadway profile, it's brilliant, isn't it? Well,
They've been stacked.
yeah, so this is another manhole, but it's a big manhole, and now is that stuff calcified that's come down from the surface? It looks like it.
Looks like it, yeah.
There was another shaft up here coming down to this, probably just for air, as much as anything, as they were driving it, and I wonder maybe if that's possibly it. No way of knowing, but it's a bit big for a manhole, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's definitely
It
stuff
looks
coming
like
down.
It was back at roof line,
Yeah.
didn't it?
Yeah,
And these ridges, they'll have been formed with water
Yeah.
polishing.
and it looks like somebody's tried to stop it off at some point, doesn't it?
Right.
So I think, well, let's put it down as a possible that was a shaft then.
Yeah, I reckon so.
How far up this road are we?
Do I need to be a package?
No, it's right. So looking back down the road there, so it is a manhole, but I think it's also been a shaft, like you say, because there's all sorts of fluids coming down as well. Right, you were on about the different steps, weren't you? Different lists, yeah. Well, what they've probably done when they've got into the coal, which you can shine it up there, they'll have hauled in, laid on a canch, and gone forward, got a, you know what I mean, advanced the road just in the coal, and then they'll have fired it up in lifts. You know, they wouldn't have fired a whole lot up here. They couldn't fire the whole roadway profile out at once, would they? They'd do it in benches. But it would have made their life a lot easier once they hit that coal. I knew I wouldn't want to be shifting one of these shots every day. It's massive. Right, look at that manhole, the profile of that manhole then. And look at all the iron. I don't know if this picture's bringing it out proper, but the iron is unbelievable in the stone. Can't quite see it.
Just try something. Picture.
Yeah, we brought it out of lower setting. Can you see the iron any better? I don't know. But take it from me, it's crimson. No, we're not going to dance to it. You can see the profile looking back there where it goes from the coal seam above near the roof right back down to the normal horse road. Actually puts me in mind of ale drift, where ales like that comes out the limestone. And it's the coal at the top. This is another manhole, but it's just like setting a board away at ale, really. That could be your sump. There's the coal. What? It's not even a foot, is it, really? 8-inch?
No, bigger than 8 inch, that. I'll tell you exactly how the tape measure in Popco.
Well, you can fit me a carpet anytime. Go on, what is it then?
10.
10-inch?
That's it, it's narrowest there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Was it there? 11 1/4 there.
And there's a ball of clay on there. You just see the ball of clay there. Somebody's had the candle stuck in there. He's had it in there while he's been working away.
That's the top judge, you pull it out that way just in case. Thank you. Really have my corkies, you're falling out. Yeah, I'll put them in my pocket. I don't know where to get out. I'll never get out. No. You'll pass the bags first and then get some